Buonasera, se siete pronti cominciamo. Ci hanno detto che possiamo iniziare. English? Yes, of course. Good evening, everybody. We have been said we can start, so if you are ready to listen to us, we're going to start. This is, first of all, welcome to all the young people that are present here today and this evening. We are highly appreciating the fact that you prefer to be here with us instead of going around in Trieste. That is a very nice town with a lot of pubs and interesting offers, but we will try to entertain you at our best. So this event has been organized by Area Science Park in collaboration with a consortium of research organizations that is called SISFVG, that is the System of Research and Innovation in Friuli Venezia Giulia, that is the region where Trieste is. And Area Science Park is one of this research organization. We are based in Padriciano and Basovizza, that is on the top of the hill, dominating Trieste, and this research organization has some special characters and some special characteristics. We are a science and technology park, and within this park we have research organizations, research institutes, research infrastructure of European level, and a lot of enterprises that go from spin-off and startups where young people can express themselves at the very beginning of a career in the enterprise, and we also have well-established firms. So we are an ecosystem where research and innovation can really find the opportunity to develop. Okay, I'm the president of this organization, and we are here tonight, to talk about the open science. Open science is a rather complex concept that is being developed at the European level by, we can say, 20 years, 10 years, many years. And the Commission, the European Commission, has been investing quite a lot to develop this concept. What do we mean by open science? Open science is, we can say that with this word we mean a way, an approach to produce scientific knowledge, and this scientific knowledge is thought to be impactful on society. Especially, we are expressing by this the idea that the knowledge belongs and it is done for the benefit of the society. So how do we make open science a reality? We do this through some key elements. The first thing is, what do we mean by open? Open means open access to data, open access to research infrastructure, open access to publications, open access to data. Data are a pervasive concept. They are everywhere, and through data we hope to achieve this knowledge. But we will develop on this concept with our two guests of this evening. Our first guest is Professor Yannis Ioannidis, to my right. Yannis Ioannidis is professor at the Department of Informatics and Telecommunications of the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, and is also a professor at the Associate Faculty at the Athene Research and Innovation Center. His work is often inspired by and applied to data management and analysis problems that arise in industrial environments or in the context of other scientific fields and the arts. He has been the coordinator of the legal entity head of OpenAir. Maybe some of you have heard about OpenAir. The coordinator of the EOSC, the European Open Science Cloud Future Strategic Project, and he has been recently elected president of the Association for Computing Machinery, very recently, July 2022. So thanks, Yannis, for having accepted this. He is coming today from Frankfurt, and we are happy that you are here. Then we have Giorgio Rossi. Giorgio Rossi is full professor of physics of matter at the University of Milan, and his research activity has been mostly characterized in the field of low-dimensional matter and largely based on the usage of synchrotron radiation sources worldwide. Giorgio has a large experience in research infrastructures, and he has been working in the synchrotron radiation light we have here in Trieste, Elettra, and the free electron laser Fermi, and is the coordinator of a European facility for the study of nanostructures. It's called NFFA. And Giorgio has also been a former chair of the ESFRI, the European Strategy Forum on Research Infrastructures, and is currently the Italian delegate in the European Open Science Cloud EOSC steering board. He is also coordinating the working group for producing the National Open Science Plan that has been adopted by the Italian Ministry of Research this year. Okay, I guess, thank you, Giorgio. He made a shorter trip just from Milano and not from Frankfurt, but anyway. So I thank our guests, and we can start I will start asking you some questions around our central issue of this evening, that is this open science. So first question is to Yannis. Open science, as we said, regards and concerns many aspects, from open access to scientific publications, as we said, open collaborations among researchers, sharing data, and sharing data even before they are fully published. This is something that researchers typically do not like much, but it is a key aspect of open science. And the other point is making this data available for public repositories. So, in your view, what are the most challenging aspects of the implementation of open science as we described it?
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here in Trieste next, and to be among you. Open science, as it was said, is, what is the opposite of open science? Well, let's say it's closed science. And closed science is the typical paradigm of science where you study, you create data, you find the results, and then you publish them, and then the data gets lost or forgotten in some disk somewhere or on a lab book. And when it is published, the paper that contains the results are published, and then someone has to pay in order to get access to it. And this usually is in small teams or individual scientists that work to do that in a very closed loop. Well, open science comes to break all these barriers and say, publish as often as possible, give out your data as often as possible, and as it was mentioned before the results are even published. Whoever If the research has been paid by the taxpayers through public funding, then the data, the knowledge that was created, the publication, should be given back to society, which paid for it, without the scientists among the society, or even the citizen scientists, have to pay. And this is a fundamental breakthrough in the thinking the last 10, 15, 20 years for this. I'll come back to the why we do this, although it may seem obvious, but does it have an impact? What are the main challenges? I can talk about the challenges of having too much data and how to handle it. I can talk about any computation and the infrastructures that need to be there in order to generate this data, in order to store this data. So there are many technological and even scientific challenges in order to implement open science. But the question of what is the biggest challenge? And none of this is the biggest challenge. The biggest challenges are sociological, are psychological, are policy challenges. We scientists, and I put myself in this category, are weird people, are egocentric people. We want to be famous. And we want to do our science and not to be bothered by anything else. We don't care about those around us. We want to get the result. And now open science comes and says, hey, share. Hey, collaborate. Even beyond what the research problem asks for. Put out the results in the open. Show me the data that produce these things. We're not going to say yes just because someone asked us to do open science. The biggest challenge is to be able to have the scientists change their mentality, change the way they work, in order to be able to start operating in a different world, the world of open science. And it is scary for us to operate in open science. Why? Because everything is in the open. So if we have made a mistake, now people will be able to go and dig and find that we made a mistake. One of the fundamental principles behind research and science in general is that when you produce a result and you disseminate to the world, other scientists to be able to reproduce this result. That's the fundamental notion of science. If you just someone declares something, only if it's others see the same thing, you see it is true. In mathematics, there is the proof. People read the proof. There's no issue of being repeated. But in all other sciences, it has to be reproduced. Depending on the fields, a huge percentage of published results, even in the best of conferences and journals, are wrong. They cannot be reproduced. Not necessarily because someone was devious and tried to fool the world. And there are cases like this. But by mistakes, by ignoring parameters that you think are universal, and yet it was specific to your environment. In medicine, which may be the most critical one, where you want the results to be true, because then your health may depend on the result a few years down the road, 65% of the published research results in medicine are not reproducible. If we have open science, whoever presented such a result will have openly accessible the publication, the data that he or she used, the data that he or she produced, the methodology, the protocols, the characteristics of the instrument, if we have physics and so on, so that then someone else can produce it. And this makes our scientists work much more. We have to work hard on these things. We have to provide this data. But this makes us also more accountable for our results. Society pays us to serve it. We should be accountable to society. We should not just be producing results because we just saw them and that's it. I mean, we did our work, we came up with results, but let's make sure others can reproduce it. Only then, trust between scientists and society will increase. Only then we'll be able to increase innovation in the way that others can pick up our results and do their own thing. We had one idea, we produced results, but those same data that we produced could be used for something else that we don't care about. Let it out. And there are examples, and we'll mention them later on in the day, where we have proof that openness and this way of working plays a very big role. And just to wrap up, I painted on purpose a gray picture for our scientists. No, we are good people, and we care about you and society and everything, and we care about the knowledge. But not going into openness without any other conditions changing we are right not to want to do that. You may not know, most of you, because you're young, but we are judged. Our careers depend on our production of results, publishing our results, and that's it. It doesn't depend on opening up our data. It doesn't depend on our results being reproducible. All it says, you publish a result in a good journal, in a good conference, you do that enough, others start citing your papers because it affects their work, you're good enough, get promoted. Change jobs from one place to another that is better. Now with openness, the criteria is changing. They say, put your results in archives, put your results in research infrastructures, use research infrastructures, the research infrastructures to safeguard your results. Collaborate. Open up even before you end up with the results. Well, if I end up doing this, I'll be investing a lot more time in open science, and then a few years down the road, a committee will come and say, well, what are your publications? And you cannot say, well, I didn't publish enough because I was doing all these other things. You will not be promoted. So the assessment of research in the context of open science shall change. And it cannot be done unilaterally just from the scientists. The deans, the universities, also the ministries of research and education should come all together, understand open science, and change the criteria that we as individuals are assessed, our departments, our universities are assessed, so that we all move towards open science. And then the world will be much more trustworthy, much more accountable, and I think all of science, all of innovation will progress much faster. So policy, sociology, psychology, mentality is the biggest challenge that needs to change.
Okay, thank you, Yannis. But this, in a sense, implies a change of mentality in everybody, also in the political decision, the person who make political decisions about that, because they should understand. It's quite interesting what you said about the assessment and the way in which scientists are evaluated. So we need to change in a coherent way. Giorgio, so just since we were touching the point of research infrastructures in the last remarks by Yannis, so can you please try to very shortly explain us what is a research infrastructure and what is the role of research infrastructures as a producer of data, and how they can enter into this aspect of open science?
Yes, let's say the modern research infrastructures took shape after World War II with the first large laboratories, particularly the CERN, for high energy physics. There was a political decision. It was one of the very first important European things coming out of a season in which Europe was a theater of war and hard competition. But so that was the first example of a complex operation in which an effort to produce very important but very expensive, very complicated enterprises for research that required investment and human capital that not a single institution, not a single country could be capable of producing. And so the idea that a multinational effort could create a situation in which researchers coming from all the participating nations and beyond, from all over the world, could work together to, in an experiment, could work together to reach a result, bringing back home the culture, the scientific culture that they were producing together. So the concept of research infrastructure has developed later and has spread around in the last 30 years to many domains. So it's not only large machines for extreme physics experiments, but it's also in the biomedical sectors, in the social and economic and cultural innovation sector, in the environmental sector. So it's an organization of scientific work based on multinational collaboration and common effort to produce results in an environment that enables very advanced research not otherwise possible in individual academic laboratories. So this has introduced somehow a concept of openness, because here it is the instruments that are open. What does it mean open? That any scientist who has a bright idea can compete to have access for a sizable share of the operating time of these infrastructures to carry out his own or her own project in a small or medium or large collaboration, depending on the disciplines. So the open access to common goods that are the research infrastructures. Sometime in the European scene, they are fully European, which means involve many European countries, as well as the European Commission. In other cases, they are national facilities. It was mentioned Elettra here. It's a synchrotron that is Italian in terms of society and support and management, but it is fully open to fully international, not only European, but worldwide proposals to access and do good science. And the judgment by the peer review method, so by other scientists that this is a good idea, is worth access, is the basic criterion. So it doesn't matter where you're from, if your institution is rich or poor, if you are already competitive in your career, or if you just are proposing a very bright idea. And so this is the basis. Now, of course, these large organizations produce output research results, which is data. And why are the research infrastructures so important to start up this new paradigm of open science concerning the openness of the data? Because they are big producers of data. They are rather large organizations capable of affording all the technological infrastructure that is needed to manage correctly the scientific data, and because they are populated by the research community in the specific field, or even in multidisciplinary approach who use and who makes reference to the infrastructure, who have a control on the quality of the science that is being produced. The people working at the synchrotron know very well if an experiment has been very successful, if another one has been faulty, and there is a control by the scientific community on the quality of those data that may be made public. And so the public will have access to something that can trust it's good, and so it can use, reuse, learn from that, and maybe apply this information that is contained in the data to produce new knowledge in a field that may be slightly off or even far off the one that motivated the researcher to acquire the data in the first place. So I think now in this European effort to make an open space for data, the research infrastructures have a primary role because they are the closest to be ready for this ideal mission. Most of them already have a data management plan. This concerns the specificity of that infrastructure. The step further to make this data interoperable, so accessible and usable, reusable also by other people from different disciplines, is an important and challenging step, but builds on a robust infrastructure that other, academic science is farther away from that level. But then, as we said, from research infrastructure, we feed back to the academic institutions as well. So it's a real system. It's an ecosystem, as people like to say, with between 300 and 1,000 research infrastructure in Europe, depending how do you count them, that are amplifiers of the amount of research and high-quality research that is being done by the hundreds of thousands of European researchers.
Thank you, Giorgio. Now, I think we got an idea of what is required to realize open science by Yannis, and what is the relationship between the system of the European research infrastructures and the data production that are a key element to which we need to access to realize open science. Yannis, I'd like to ask you now, how do you think that the digital data technology, something we need, can realize effectively the dream of open science? And what is the possibility to share in an effective manner the information and allow all to develop new knowledge from the information contained in the data? Digital data technology realizing this dream of open science. How can we effectively
Before we do this, maybe I want to talk about the electronic infrastructures that in comparison with...
Yes. E-infrastructures, I can ask, I can add something. We are used to research, we have heard from Giorgio Rossi, research infrastructures that are typically physical equipment, but we also have something that is called e-infrastructures, and this is the infrastructure for the open data, in a sense. But maybe you can explain much better what is it and how is it needed.
Giorgio Rossi talked about research infrastructures, and these are, in some sense, vertical, thematic organizations, thematic installations that focus on a particular area of science. They can be observatories of the stars, there can be synchrotrons that were mentioned, like Electra here in Italy. They can be biological data banks and so on. These, all of them, require digital technologies, electronic infrastructures for the network to communicate, for the storage to store the data, for the computers to process this data, to process the algorithms, the models that scientists come up with. And this can be cloud computing, or as it is called, high throughput computing, or supercomputers, or how it is called, high performance computing, and so on. All of these, you can consider them as horizontal infrastructures. They don't have a smell, they don't have a color. All scientists need a network, all scientists need computing. Europe has developed, again, investing at a pan-European level, like the research infrastructures, it's horizontal electronic infrastructures that are, especially in the context of open science, which is data-based, predominantly and openly data-based, to have these infrastructures to support what the research infrastructures are doing. And now we have the issue of, I said these are generic horizontal infrastructures. Are they truly horizontal? Well, if we go to CERN, CERN is the one out of which the web came out, has its own networking, its own computing, its own all these facilities, and it feels, or it is, and maybe the truth is in between, that it is so specialized that it cannot use the horizontal infrastructures. But many other research infrastructures and for many other activities on research, even beyond what research infrastructures are doing, are taking advantage of these horizontal infrastructures to do open science. And when we share, and that's again a fundamental concept of open science, sharing any commodity, okay, makes sense financially as well, not just philosophically, not just for advancing science, but also financially. You can imagine if each one of you had a separate network in your home. The cost of networking would be tremendous. But we have the general network and GEAN, which is the scientific network, that we all share in the same way that we all share the streets. The streets are not scientific research infrastructure, there are other infrastructures built for all of us to use. In the same way, all electronic infrastructures are horizontal for all researchers, for all research infrastructure to use. And that's, they offer a substrate on top of which all the other services can be offered.
Okay, thank you. So I think that now we have settled the scene, and we can now maybe enter into some detail of open science. One thing that is important, and it's typical, it's a characteristic of open science, is the fact that the data are made available to different communities, different scientific communities, to researchers coming from different fields. So if we realize this, if we make this data available to different diverse communities, the question to Giorgio is how this can help, this sharing data and making data available to diverse scientists coming from different fields can really help advancing knowledge in a specific field or topic or challenge.
Well, there are obvious examples, so let's start from the obvious things. We came in the recent years to absorb more and more the concept of complexity of the problems. We have a highly crowded world with some climate changes, with population movements. This always happened in history, but now it's millions of people who move, 100 millions of people who may move due to the climate change. And we had the pandemics with the unexpected dynamics. So it's very clear that to understand the complexity of some phenomena, if you take it from the public health point of view, and if you want to have a reasonable understanding, you cannot make abstraction of the environment development, the climate, the pollution, the way energy is produced in a given place in the world where something is happening on the health care aspect, the social perception of what is happening, because this ensemble of things will determine how all the sapiens will behave, will perceive, will decide, and how an effective healthcare initiative is consistent with the environment in which the problem has become evident. Now, who can produce the most reliable data on the environment, on climatology, if not the specialist? But who can put together these different valuable pieces of information if there is not an open internet of data where you can know that this knowledge is available? It has been taken because of the Institute of Climatology, of whatever, academic reasons. This is the main reason why researchers do research, fundamental curiosity. But they have obtained some data. If I know that those data are there, I can go, look, see if they match my need, and reuse those information contained in the data to produce knowledge on a different problem. That is, understanding why a certain health problem is coming up in a certain environment, in a certain social situation, in a certain climate situation, etc. So we see that as we perceive, and it's typical of our century, to perceiving the complexity of things, that new knowledge in a very narrow sector can be good, but by itself does not help us in understanding what we want to do, what we need to do in an intelligent way. Then we see that the need and the technical possibility that we have now to share the data allows reaching a better basis of information to develop some thinking and to produce knowledge. The data don't contain knowledge. The data contain information. The knowledge is produced by the researcher who interprets and proposes an idea based on the data. So knowledge can be produced also by people with a different aim if they're capable of accessing those data. So this introduces a concept that is the real technical, maybe also sociological and psychological, but it's also very much technical difficulty, and is the concept of interoperability of the data. So the data to be useful, the data by themselves are a collection of zeros and ones in a computer memory, but to be useful, we must know how they were obtained, under which circumstances, by which methods, and therefore they must complete it, but what is technically defined as metadata. Metadata are the information on in which circumstances the data were obtained, and that will allow somebody else to say, well, these zeros and ones were obtained under those circumstances. I understand those circumstances. Under those circumstances, there is something else that I know it happens from another study. I put together the things, and I can produce new knowledge. So the effort of the open data part of open science is to make available data from different disciplines, but organized in such a way they can be used by different subjects, so they can be interoperable, they can be analyzed with different software, typical of different communities. They can, therefore, by themselves, generate, through computation, through data analysis, some new information that will be stored again in the open public access.
Yeah, maybe, Giorgio, you can just elaborate more, because in a sense you introduced the concept of fair data already. So maybe you can explain us what are fair data.
FAIR is an acronym that means findable. So you know that some data on some subject exist. Accessible, you don't only know that they exist, but you know where they are and under which rules you can access or ask to access to those data. Interoperable is what I just meant, so I can find it, I can access, and I can use them because they're ready to be used, even by me, who have nothing to do with the guys who obtained those data to start with, and reusable. So if all these first three conditions are there, then I can reuse the data for repeating the same thing or with the same aim as the original. So this is the reproducibility check, made easy. Or I trust that these are good data, so the trust in the data quality is fundamental, and I use them to elaborate some thinking on a different subject that those data can contribute in making it at a higher level. So we speak of fair data. EOSC wants to become the internet of fair data, and fair means these four concepts that are the basis of the data for research, for the open research environment.
Thank you. So now we heard that the European Commission, as we said, is promoting this EOSC, European Open Science Cloud, that we have just heard is taught as the internet of fair data, but the Commission is also promoting what is called 9 data spaces on top of the EOSC. And the first one, the first data space, is the European Health Data Space. So my question to Yannis is, what will be the impact of this effort on open science, EOSC, and the economy of knowledge in general?
I assume that nobody from the European Commission is in the audience, right? Okay, then I can speak freely. It's a tradition of the Tower of Babel in the European Commission, where some things are happening here, and then the same thing, or very close, is happening there, and they don't talk, and then a whole bunch of concepts, initiatives, programs pop up that are intimately related, and yet they pop up completely independently. And then as an afterthought, say, these are related, but now we have announced them. You researchers and whoever is going to implement this, cut your throats in order to make them related and not waste more than you should. Well, the European Open Science Cloud and the 9 European data spaces is an example of this situation, whereas they could all be in the same program, in the same, developed in the same ecosystem by design. Now they're separate things. There is a distinctive difference that could justify why it is different, because EOSC, it is European Open Science Cloud, so it is about scientific data, research data, and everything else that Giorgio Rossi and myself explained earlier, whereas the European data spaces are supposed to focus on industry, industrial sectors, and as it was mentioned, the first one, the more mature one, is the European Health Data Space. But what data useful to industry is not scientific. and what scientific data is not useful to a certain extent to industry as well. The two are intimately related. And now we are called to, of course, take advantage of one development in one in the development of the other. The European Open Science Cloud is embracing medical data. Therefore, the European health data space has to interact with that aspect of EOSC. A whole bunch of pan-European research infrastructures are in the health domain. And therefore, there has to be some communication. Most, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of medical, biological, genetic knowledge in the scientific sense needs to come from clinical data, data that is collected in hospitals, data that is collected in individual doctors' offices when all of us at some point visit and we get various types of measurements. These are supposed to go to the European health data space for use by industry, pharmaceutical industry, insurance industry, all the industries related to medtech, medical technology industry. All these, the European health data space is supposed to serve those industries. But EOSC needs to use this. And especially for the health data, in addition to all the other complexities, the technological complexities, the sociological and so on, we have the issue of privacy. Research data on stars, okay, that observatories collect, there is no privacy. Maybe there is extraterrestrial life, and those there may care about their privacy, but we don't care yet about their privacy. But when we go to hospitals, okay, our own data is not, we don't want to be used in a ways that we don't control. How are now those clinical data that have to preserve, protect the privacy of the individual patients? We can use them for research on the other side, on the European Open Science Cloud. There is digital technology that has been developed called, if any of you are into computing, called differential privacy. In terms of computing securely, there's secure multi-party computation and data homomorphism and so on. So there are technologies, some of which are actually explicitly mentioned in the European policy for data privacy, the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, that is carefully constructed. Technology should not circumvent, find ways, and has found ways to achieve the right level of privacy while being within the law of GDPR. Connecting it to EOSC is yet another challenge, because again, the two sides must talk in the philosophy of open science, but now we're talking about industry being open, and that's yet another level of complexity to achieve, because industry is for profit. Industry needs to protect its knowledge in order to do profit. So the European data spaces, I think, in short term, they will have some difficulties in interacting with EOSC, but medium term, long term, we all should work on this in order to have the right interaction and take advantage of the developments in each other.
Thank you. We have some things to think about, this relation between public and private aspects of the research and how they relate into this openness concept. Now we are almost at the end of our session, and before asking questions to from the audience, we can touch a final point that is about sustainability. Sustainability is something that is present into the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. I think that everybody has heard about sustainability. No, we still have a couple of questions. Thank you. So the first one, and maybe you can, both of you, I would like to ask both of you to answer this. So how can openness, open science, this concept of openness, help to solve the sustainability issue? This is one question. And the other point is, would the EOS be sustainable itself? Is the intense data traffic sustainable economically and ecologically? This is something that I guess is of interest, of some interest also to our young audience, especially if we think to the traffic we are used to have with our mobile, for example. So who wants to start? George.
Looking at me. So let me say this thing first and try to attract your attention. Culture is the only good that increases its value the more is spread around. We are used to give high value of rare things, exclusive things, but culture increases its value the more is spread around. Most people have culture, the stronger is culture. I think data are a new merchandise that intrinsically increases its value the more is spread around. The more people can access and use and reuse data, the highest is the value of this data. So it's a value that increases in time. Any other good that we purchase has a value that decreases in time. If we buy a large computer, after 3 or 4 years, we have to rebuy it again because it's obsolete, it consumes too much energy and has to be replaced. The data, if they are good, they will stay there and have higher and higher value the more they are reused, because the more knowledge is withdrawn from those data. So when we speak of sustainability, we have to understand again the complexity of the concept of sustainability. There is a direct, how much is the bill I have to pay to keep this memory on and conserve all this data, how much I have to pay to renew my optical fibers to move the data around, or to replace my computers to more powerful ones or more efficient ones, and so on. And so you need a business plan, as it's usually said, and to have a correct balancing of public resources. But this is only part of the story. If our idea behind sharing the data and behind the open science will work, will take some time to deliver back, but when we will it will start to deliver back, it will deliver back very likely a much higher value than it has been put in to build the system. So this is, to me, there are things whose sustainability must be understood at large and not just on accounting every year of how much it costed, how much I earned. Although this is also a practical and very necessary aspect. Now, I think Yannis will say more on this, but the one aspect you said, is it sustainable, a system that will stimulate the traffic of data? We are wasting a lot of resources now to move around informations with low value, low content. When we send around 12 pictures with WhatsApp of our dinner, there is not much more information that we did send one, or if we wrote a nice story in 3 lines of characters saying we had a great dinner. We don't understand that sending around a picture, a high-resolution picture with the WhatsApp is like keeping a 60-watt bulb on all the night, forgetting the light on in the kitchen when we go to sleep. We wake in the morning, we said how stupid we were, but in the meantime we may have sent around hundreds of pictures on the WhatsApp. So there is a general sustainability problem. Data centers, large data centers, which are not for science, are for commercial. Amazon and similar companies, Alibaba, etc., have an impact on economy. Ireland, which is the less defensive country in Europe that accepts all kind of foreign investment, is reaching 10% of the power consumption of the whole country for data centers of Amazon and Google. 10%. So it means boiling the water of the rivers, polluting with heat the country, absorbing 10%. Why? Because there is an unsustainable way. Now you send around a picture on WhatsApp, that picture will sit in at least 6 or 7 data centers around the world, because all these services become unused if the picture is not there immediately. But for the picture to be there immediately, it is redundant 7 times. So imagine how crazy is this usage that we are doing now, because we believe it's normal, it's harmless. Now, if we move around real knowledge, I think it will be not bigger amount of data. There are technical solutions. What is really important to have access to and to share is the metadata, is knowing where the data are and how they were obtained. Then you know if you're really interested. The data may still sit in the place where they were produced. If you know that you're really interested because you have read the metadata and the catalog, you know they exist, then you access, but you don't access a million times. You access once, twice, then you decide if the computing will be done in the place where the data are, or if the data can be transferred to your home institution. But it's not a huge amount of traffic. So from that point of view, I think good open science will only marginally impact the bad use of electronic communication that we are doing now.
I saw a couple of you using your phones, sending photographs. So you are influencing climate change. So be careful. Be careful. A quick, I think Giorgio covered all of it. Just one thing on the sustainability of FIOSC itself. Actually, you said it in your previous answer. You explained fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. But the key term that Giorgio Rossi mentioned before, that is not part of the FAIR acronym, is quality. You can have all your data, all the data being fair. You can find it, access it, reuse it. But if it's garbage, it's useless. Nothing good will come out of it. So the research infrastructures are guarantors of quality. And if, in the context of open science, we produce quality data, and we store quality data, and we send around quality data, then NEOSC will be sustainable, because the impact it will have in the economy will be such that it will be sustainable. Now, on your first question, how can open science affect the humanities' attempt to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals? How many of you have heard of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals? Raise your hand. Not very many. Okay, then one sentence, if I may, I can explain. In 2015, the United Nations signed and approved that the world is not sustainable anymore. We cannot afford to keep operating, eating, working, moving in the same way. And it established 17 so-called Sustainable Development Goals. Goals that we can continue developing as humanity, but let's find it in a sustainable way. Out of the 17, the 17th one is a method to implement the other 16, so it's 16 thematic ones. Health for everyone, eliminate poverty, clear waters, clear land, addressing climate change are some examples. The goal was to do it by 2030. This is too soon. In 15 years, there is no way to change the way we operate. But nevertheless, there are goals. There are sustainable development solutions networks that have been established by the United Nations. Thematic, local, there is the Italian one, the Greek one, also bigger regions, Mediterranean one, actually led by an Italian, Europe, Black Sea, and so on and so forth. So even as young scientists, check it out and see how you can contribute from your own perspective, from your own corner, this development. Now, open science, as we said, lets data being open, lets processes being open. That has been proven that it accelerates progress. And what most obvious example by what happened when we had a challenge that is not in the Sustainable Development Goals, the COVID pandemic. The minute in March 2020 that we realized, Bergamo and then all the cities around the world shutting down, everyone that had data or publications opened up. Even the commercial publishers, Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, and so on, they said for 3 months, for 6 months, we open all our publications so that scientists can have access, free access to all this knowledge to understand this damn virus and then find the vaccines. And it worked. Also, research infrastructures opened up, changed their plans, worked overtime, double shift, so that when something was related to the virus was given priority. And openness, everyone says this, by having open science methodologies there, it accelerates the vaccines, the finding of the vaccines in unprecedented speed. So openness works, and for other challenges that are maybe long-term, like climate change and so on, open science will have a tremendous impact. So you as young scientists, especially those that later on, already now, will go to research, I encourage you, think openly. I mean, you are open on Facebook, on Instagram, and everything. I mean, you spill your guts out all the time. Well, do that also when you do your science.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to you and to the audience. So now if you have, I think we heard a lot about this concept of sharing and collaboration, but I would like to ask you if you have questions or some.
So I think we can all agree that humans have a right to be curious about the natural world, but we now live in a world where we have data scientists, we have these citizen scientists who are these so-called biohackers, and they do gene editing in their mom's basement, for example. And they get their data from open access databases and also forums in which the data is incomplete. And obviously we don't know everything about the genome and gene expression yet. So my question for you is, do you think sometimes science should have borders? And in the age we live in today, is it even possible to contain the spread of incomplete data?
Who wants to answer?
Yes, this is a central point, incomplete data. Now, let's say, there is a limit of knowledge. We don't know enough. We have not done enough experiments. We have not done enough observations. And so, I mean, civilization at different rates at different time in history, but has always to progress. The increase in the amount of data that is being produced is very high. People say it's exponential. That means that the amount of data in 5 years will be mostly new data. All what we have now will be, if not marginal, a small amount. So here is an important point that we want as much as possible of the new data to be complete in your wording, to be fair, to be enriched with the metadata to become. For the data that we have today or that were collected in the past, there are special cases like the time series, meteorological, climatological time series. These are non-reproducible data by definition because we cannot measure again how it was a glacier in 1600 on the Alps. So we have to take those data, and those data we have to curate and make fair. But the new data must be born as automatically fair and complete with the metadata as possible. This is a big technological effort. Something that you should not take as a worry of what Yannis said, that we have to change mentality, there are some psychological barriers, etc. But the message that to make the data fair is a large amount of work that will add on my responsibilities as a researcher, and so it will slow down my productivity, etc. We have to overcome that very fast by automatization of the collection of the metadata. So having only the intervention of the researcher at a very high level of explaining what is all about, but then the data will be complete. Now, if I gather in your question also the concept of citizen science, you mentioned that, that's an interesting thing, but let me give you a very pragmatic answer. It will come later. It's so complicated what we have to do that we have to start with research infrastructures, with large research performing organizations that can afford to guarantee the quality of the data. Learning by doing, we will come to a situation in which we will understand how much of what is called the long tail of science, that is small distributed laboratories all the way down to citizen science, will be enabled to be qualified as highly valuable and enter the EOSC. In my view, it's not popular maybe what I say, but it's a process that may take 10 years to reach there. It's not the first priority, otherwise we risk to pollute. I mean, some serious problems of the internet is that it's not always reliable what you find there. And if you have a problem and you trust without judgment what you can find on the internet, you are at risk of getting wrong knowledge or being totally misled. So if we speak of research data, we have to be very careful that the trust in the system must be high. So let's start from those organizations that are not made by better people, but are more organized and ready to do this quality check and to do the completeness of the data sets.
Just one sentence. Throughout the history of humanity, any new advancement could be used for good or could be used for bad. Could produce good things. I mean, the knife, you can cut your food and eat it, or you can kill someone. The same thing is now with openness of data and all the technologies. And fake news, in some sense, are a result of that. Well, as it will happen, and as a society, as a scientific community, we have to find countermeasures to deal with the way we try to do it with fake news, to deal with complete data, to contain the disbursement of them, or the results that a citizen scientist come up with, how I discovered the cure for cancer, others to come and say, well, be careful and so on. So.
Thank you. Thanks for this question that raises many other issues, and we actually would need another hour to discuss, and you will be killed by this news. Anyway, any other question before we go?
Yeah, I have a question. I was curious about, you said that the future of science is open science, but that the academic board is not ready yet, or is getting ready for it. I mean, to go on in an academic career, you have to publish, that's what they evaluate. So in practical terms, are the university doing something, the system is changing, or not yet? What are the changes that are happening towards this?
Indeed, it's the future, but it's not here yet. I mean, elements of it are, but the assessment is key. Currently, there are efforts, and Europe is a pioneer in this way, although there are discussions elsewhere. And this year, starting in January, or I can't quite remember now, about 300 institutions around Europe have come together under a European Commission initiative to redefine and come up with the rules for assessing research at the individual level all the way at the organizational level. And this will be a process that's started and will continue to identify exactly what the criteria for assessment will be in the world of open science. And then it will take some time for this to permeate to the community, to the policymakers, and so on and so forth. So it is a process that that will advance. It will not be a fast process, but we are on our way. So it is in the future, but we are acting in the present to arrive at it in the future.
If I can add something, I think there is progress. Now I mentioned something that it is significant. This year, after a process that lasted more or less the whole legislation through the three governments, Italy has published a national plan for open science, Piano Nazionale Scienza Aperta. All the Italians can read it on the website of the Ministry of University and Research. The English version is not available yet, so that's why I said all the Italians can read it, or Italian-speaking people of different nationality. But it's organized in targets, objectives. One is openness of publication and access of open access to all the published data and papers. Another one is on open data and makes reference explicit to the EOSC. Another one is about training for data scientists, data stewards, so data literacy to help the society to be ready to use this data in a productive way. And one is about evaluation, assessment of research organizations and researchers, making very clear statements. Now, this is a decree of the Italian government. Now, as we know, going from a law to the practical implementation is a process. So clearly the university will have to align with this law, but there are no instructions, practical instructions yet. We hope in the next month or year or so it will come, the application rules. The universities took and the research performing institution took note of this law, because it's a law, and started asking, yes, but what do we have to do? What is the ministry that has to do? So this part is work in progress. So I'm not guaranteeing that we'll be immediately showing the effect of this law, but the effect of having a law, and France has one, and Germany has one. So it's happening. And so it will concern the career of you, who are definitely younger than the speakers here, and will be taking advantage or adjusting to a new system.
The corresponding Greek plan, though, nobody will have any trouble from you reading it. Not because it's in English, but because it doesn't exist anymore. We still press politicians. we hit on their head. Hopefully it will come soon.
Okay, thank you. I think. Okay, so this means no more questions. We are ready to, we can leave, I think. And thanks again, and enjoy Trieste, and enjoy the other events under this Trieste Next organization. Thank you.